It's Secure Digital Life. And this is Doug from another land. So off in the hinterlands of the world, somewhere that you've never seen and have no idea where I am. Anything could be outside that window. You just don't know what it is. It could be the Kremlin. It could be, it's daylight, so you can figure it's at least in this hemisphere. But today on SDL, we get a chance to talk to Jesse Endahl, who's a really cool guy, and is the co-founder and chief information security officer of Fleetsmith. Jesse had a really cool talk at Blackhat, if you were at Blackhat, and he was talking about machines trusting other machines and touching other machines, sometimes without their visible consent. And some of this involved Apple and some other things like that. So I thought we could talk a little bit today with Jesse about, do you trust that machine that you're touching or that's touching you? So all this and more on Secure Digital Life.
This is a Security Weekly production.
Welcome to Secure Digital Life. If your users are going to keep putting risky stuff on your machine, you're screwed. So Todd can help us understand the complexity of blockchain.
I was reading through the show notes, man. Oof.
In binary, it would be 001. Who cares? But it's probably not significant anyway. Like you're looking out through the HAL dot, you know, like,
oh,
hey, Dave.
It's like Sims, but with, you know,
it would be like
I,
Sims.
instead of AI, it's only.
Are you working on earning your Security Plus certification? Earn your certification faster and smarter with Cybex. Their courses and guides are compiled with CompTIA-approved content, providing you with the knowledge to be fully prepared on exam day. The Cybex Security Plus Gold course includes a partner-to-you pass guarantee. Users enjoy free course updates and repeats until you pass the Security Plus exam. Learn more and register for a free trial today at cybex.com/go/free trial. When you are ready to purchase, save 50% with code SECURITY50. Hurry, this offer ends December 31st. Accredited by Microsoft, Cisco, NetApp, IDLE, Oracle, and EC Council, QuickStart delivers high-impact, low-cost IT training through its cognitive learning platform in multiple domains. With QuickStart, you get an ever-growing catalog of courses, self-paced courses offered through a monthly subscription, virtual classrooms offered through an annual subscription, peer-to-peer learning, mentoring, official courses, certified instructors, hands-on labs, and more. For more information, visit www.quickstart.com. Use coupon code PAUL20 to get 20% off on all cybersecurity courses. Quick Start, creating world-class technologists. You, and only you, should join us for our webcast with Chronicle entitled Intelligence-Powered Malware Hunting. That webcast will be held on December 5th from 3 to 4 p.m. EST. So if you go to, and please go there now. Actually, don't go there. Go there after the show. Go there and register at securityweekly.com/chronicle if you want to register to see that webcast, which will likely inform you. If you are interested in quality over quantity and having meaningful conversations instead of just a badge scan, although badge scans are okay, join us April 1st through 3rd at Disney's Contemporary Resort. Did you hear that? Disney's Contemporary Resort for InfoSec World 2019, where you can connect the network with like-minded individuals in search of actionable information. Use the registration code. This is the good part. Use the registration code OS19-SEC Week for 15% off the main conference or a world pass. So that's a lot. InfoSec World was really fun last year, despite that tornado thing that happened when we were trying to leave. But that actually turned into a good thing, so we got to go to the theme park. So anyway, today joining us along with Russ, who's actually in the studio, me, who is in the hinterlands, is Jesse Endahl. Hi, Jesse.
Hi there.
Hey, Jesse. How you doing?
How you doing? Very good.
Good. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Yeah, it's great to have you here along with the stuff about Fleetsmith. So one of the things that I guess sort of got this conversation started was I had really been engaged reading this DHS report about the nuclear industry, and that made me start thinking a lot about trust. And one of the things that we do, and that you do, and that I do, and everybody does, that's using any kind of systems today, is we start trusting all kinds of other machines. And we have to trust them, whether we want to or not, often, because Apple Pay or something, not to run them down, but just, Apple Pay means I trust that kiosk when I walk up to the counter and I want to pay. American Airlines says you have to trust me so that you can use our app to check in for your flight or to do your boarding pass or whatever on a plane. All those things start to create trust, and they also start to create trust chains. So now I'm trusting you and you're trusting someone else. And by default, then I may be trusting that someone else, and it gets kind of squirrely. Well, so Fleetsmith introduced a product called Dashboard. And this product is about achieving full authentication of all the devices that you have deployed and ensuring that you maintain that full authentication kind of status. So some of this to me is a little, I don't mean that the product's old school, but there have been ideas like this all along, because we've been seeing trust ideas and trust issues ever since we've had computers, whether it was way, way back in the ages of coal-fired, gas-fired, pull-starting mainframes, or today with an Apple Watch. We're still having to trust between devices. So Jesse, maybe you could tell us a little bit about this Dashboard product and how it works?
Absolutely, yeah. So I guess I'll just start by saying a lot of, dashboards aren't a new, unique idea. There's been, dashboards in many device management products. And so we wanted to kind of take a different approach. And specifically, usually it's kind of empty when you start using a product. Your dashboard is just empty. There's nothing there. And you have to know what's important to you and what's important for security to actually populate stuff onto that dashboard. And so one of the interesting things we did is, I drew on my experience as a security engineer and thought, okay, what are the things that really matter? One of them that I think people don't think about enough is just getting a full fleet enrollment, because if you don't have all your devices enrolled, or if they become enrolled but then they drop off the face of the earth, they stop checking in, all of the reasons why it might do that are bad. It could be lost, it could be stolen. The employee could have decided they just don't like their device being managed and uninstalled, or maybe an attacker has, disabled the software, right? But no matter what, if you have devices that were enrolled and stopped checking in, that's something you really need to know about. And so those are two of the metrics we put front and center. And then, of course, that's the prerequisite for all the more conventional fleet visibility metrics, like, are all my devices encrypted? If someone loses this at a park, this laptop, is someone going to be able to just pick it up, plug it into another computer, turn off the power, turn it back on, hold down the T on the keyboard, and copy off all the files without even having the password? A lot of people don't realize that's the default if you don't enforce disk encryption, but it is. And so that's another thing we do, is we actually put that explanation of that attack right next to that metric in the dashboard. And so we're trying to sort of, push and teach best practices within the product. So that's pretty cool. But to get back to your other question about authentication, that's been a big area of focus recently in the past 12 months or so. Both us presenting at Blackhat as well as Duo Labs out of Duo Security have been focusing a lot around the actual sort of chain of trust for DEP and MDM. So for those not familiar, those are two Apple programs that make it such that you can drop ship a device directly to a remote employee. When it turns on and connects to the internet for the first time, it calls into your MDM product, such as Fleetsmith, and configures itself completely automatically over the internet. As you can imagine, making sure that you've got a really solid chain of trust for all of those bootstrapping steps is pretty important. And so that's what our talk at Blackhat is focused on. Cool.
So, one of the first times I ever really ran into thinking about this, I think very seriously, was I was doing consulting, and we were in Texas, and one of our consultants had parked his rental car out front of this restaurant, and we were sitting there eating, and he said, "Wow, look at that! That guy just broke into that car and is running off with stuff." And he realized it was his, and that they had grabbed his laptop and his dirty clothes. And of course, he didn't care much about his dirty clothes, but they were running off with his laptop. And the laptop had on it, it had a generic password that was actually written on the top of the laptop, because this was a company issued laptop for consultants. And so the password was on a piece of tape on the top, and the login was on it. And on that laptop, they had not only these like very important files and sensitive files for the company, they also had the VPN that would connect to the company. It was the first time I started thinking about that kind of trust, about how many of these people are out there in the world running around with access to our back-end systems. So would the dashboard, would the dashboard product then like monitor, say, like mobile devices and all these things that now we have? Back then it was pretty much just laptops, but today we've got people with cell phones, we've got people with tablets, we got people with laptops, with desktops, all these things connecting to the system. Would the dashboard just give me like this sort of world view of all that?
Yeah. I should mention we're an Apple-specific product, but it will be all of the laptops, the desktops, the iPhones, the iPads, all of that stuff. And the thing I really should have mentioned earlier is that Dashboard is actually a feature that's available in both our paid offering and the Fleetsmith Intelligence, which is our free, completely free product. And so the cool thing about that is that you can basically roll this out to your entire fleet, all your laptops, all your iPhones, iPads, and have full visibility of the security metrics about your fleet. Is screen lock turned on? Is the password complexity enforced? Is disk encryption on, firewall? All of this stuff across your whole fleet. So it's pretty powerful.
So that's going to be something that goes way beyond just like our initial solutions to this, which we saw back in the 90s and early part of the 21st century, which was like, use a VPN. That was one of the initial corporate solutions, but obviously, even from the example with Chris, that didn't solve the problem. But so could you maybe tell us how that works?
Yeah, actually, I'm really glad you brought that up, because that's a big fundamental difference between how we've built Fleetsmith versus what's been sort of the historical status quo for device management. So we actually built a certificate authority directly into our product. And so anytime you're approving a device, it's actually being issued a client certificate from our CA. And we take security really seriously. I know every vendor says that, but we actually do. Concretely, the software, the open source kind of core of our CA is CFSSL out of Cloudflare, which is a really solid project. And it's actually used as kind of the core for CA operations in the Let's Encrypt CA from the EFF, if you're familiar with that. And so it's been audited by, I believe it was by NCC Crypto Services. And so there's kind of a lot of effort that's been put into making sure that's a solid foundation to build on. But to your point, that's why we don't need to, tell people to get on VPN. And it means that we're able to do everything that we do with devices totally securely across the internet without someone being on VPN, which is really a game changer, because in the past, you've had this really big problem where the only devices getting patched or getting security policies pushed are the ones that are physically on the corporate network or on VPN. And, with today's kind of remote offices and remote workers, that just doesn't work anymore. You'll just have totally unmanaged machines if you go that route. So.
Well, do you think that one of the early solutions to this that was produced, and it wasn't for Apple, but it was something called Kerberos. And if you're not familiar with Kerberos, it was MIT, I think, developed it. It was a ticketing system that allowed a device that was connected to a network to actually have an encrypted ticket. And these encrypted tickets were then verified on the other end by a Kerberos server. And this was, of course, one of these early trust solutions. And one of my problems with it was just that it did authenticate a device, but it didn't authenticate who was sitting at that device. So do you think that these sorts of trust solutions still have that kind of hole in them, where if I have the phone and I'm in the phone, your dashboard's not going to detect, it would be almost unreasonable to say that it would detect that, but do you think that's still part of the problem?
Yeah, I do think it's still part of the problem. I think the way that you're seeing people start to address that is through basically a dual track approach, where you've got, let's say client certificates on the device to authenticate the device, but then you've also got a user authentication, and you try to force all sort of authentication through a central kind of choke point with, either like a reverse proxy set up with like Nginx, and then you put all your internal apps behind that reverse proxy, and then you require user authentication at the proxy. So that's a good approach for internal apps. Of course, you've got cloud services, and so for the cloud services, you see people using like SAML as a choke point. And so things like Okta or Duo Beyond, there's a few different options for kind of implementing that approach and making it such that people can't authenticate unless they're going through this centralized single sign-on type of workflow.
I mean, I think all that is critical at this point, because we constantly have people on and Russ, if you have anything, just feel free to jump right in. But I mean, even on a university campus where we don't have massive national security issues, we still have the idea that all these people are using our systems, they're accessing sensitive information, and we don't necessarily, I mean, I love the idea of this dashboard telling me this is who it says it is, and then I like the idea of extending that, on out. What about to other vendors, though? I got really into this DHS report. I thought that was really, really nice. And the link, if you want to see the report or you haven't read it, I've been talking about it for a while, but if you want to read the report, the link is in the show notes to this CERT report. The government really released a lot of information in this report that I hadn't seen them doing in the past, and I really like that. And this is a very sophisticated attack on the power industry that originated not from a weak system internally, which was pretty bulletproof, but it instead was from a vendor of a vendor, and it was just this chain of trust where I start way off out of the loop somewhere at the guy who provides, Kleenex to the most compromised, and then just, on and on. You think that this, again, that you're moving towards sort of that kind of a big picture trust?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I think contractors and vendors are an area that's kind of, for some reason, continually overlooked, even though you see, breach after breach, caused by lack of oversight and management of those categories. So I totally agree. And the organizations that I've seen do a really good job with this actually, have policies where a certain amount of access, you're going to be issued, a device that's controlled by the main organization. And I think that's an interesting way to do it, because, on the one hand, I think the way the companies try to manage that risk is by putting in place some legal protections, some contracts saying, you, the vendor, has to, meet this standard. But, that's legal protection, sure, but you're not going to get the technical oversight from a security team, making sure that they're actually, doing what they legally agreed to do. And so that risk still exists, even if you're legally protected. And I think that's the thing that has to probably change.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's a huge threat vector. Back some time ago, I was doing consulting for contractors who were providing services to military bases in Europe. And, you would go to these contractors and start meeting with them, and it was just unbelievable. I mean, these were private commercial interests who had no concept of security, especially in, say, 2003, 2004. And to them, the internet was just this weird, pit that you connected to. And they didn't think anything at all about, having trucks that were equipped with these, like, basically no login systems that were starting to be connected to the internet and driving those onto military bases and all this kind of stuff. So there's a lot of fear, I think, in the private sector about this kind of thing, because they have not had they're getting it. I mean, it's starting to happen, but they really hadn't had the focus on this sort of trust chain thing that goes on. The other thing I wanted to, and I know Russ is probably interested in this a lot too, because he's a big Apple person. But maybe you could tell us a little bit about how this same idea comes out of your Blackhat talk.
Yeah, absolutely. So the interesting thing that we focused on in the Blackhat talk was, it was sort of split into two parts. The first was creating the first real public overview of every stage of that bootstrapping process from the time the device first powers on, calls into Apple servers and says, am I enrolled in this thing called DEP, Device Enrollment Program?
Yeah.
And if it is, then Apple responds to the device saying, yes, you are, and your MDM is this product over here, and here's their server URL. And so then it connects to us or to another product if we're using another product. And basically, there's 7 stages of this whole bootstrapping process. And what we realized is, you could potentially do, if you're an attacker, you could potentially do a man-in-the-middle attack or attempt one at many of those stages. Mm-hmm. And so we started testing, does Apple, support CA pinning or certificate pinning at each of these stages? Because if they don't, then you can imagine a nation state might be pretty interested in an attack that lets them compromise a device the very first time it's powered on, right? Which is what this would let you do. And so we managed to find one weakness, and we did a proof of concept during the talk where we actually showed installing a package silently in the background the very first time a device powered on. And by the time you see the desktop load for the very first time, we've already popped calculator, and it's running, in the foreground there. And the thing that's sort of unclear from the demo is that that's actually done as root. And so the device is fully rooted by that time. And the way we were able to do that is because one of the MDM commands, specifically the one for installing an application, didn't support pinning. And because we have that CA built into our product, we were able to simulate a CA compromise, which a nation state is capable of, to issue a secondary server certificate with the same FQDN, the same common name, for our MDM server, and perform a man-in-the-middle attack from my laptop against the demo laptop. And so the cool thing is that Apple responded really well, and they introduced the ability to do CA pinning in a new MDM command for installing applications. And so now there's pinning at all these important stages, which would prevent that type of nation-state attack.
Russ, do you have any comments on that, or do you have a question?
I mean, in terms of the MDM, a colleague of mine and I were. He had just gotten his laptop from his employer, and we were playing around with this new MDM platform that hadn't been used prior to this year. I guess it had to do with a specific chipset needed. I don't know if it was TPM or if it was just the new Intels that had come out, but I guess Apple devices needed this new platform. So one of the things that made us start looking at this type of thing and getting around it is, he didn't like the fact that his employer was sort of monitoring him and the things that he was doing. So we didn't know how far it went. We were wondering if GPS was involved and tracking and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, it's ultimately their property in the long run, right? It's the business's property. So we were trying to get around that. And so, one of the things that kept coming, we reformatted the drive, we did a whole bunch of stuff, and we were able to finally get it so we could put an older image from a backup, a time capsule backup. We were able to do that, and then the box came up saying, oh, this is a member of, mobile device management, contact Apple servers. This is a device on their server, presumably through MAC address and so on and so forth. And so that kept coming up, and so we found a way to suppress that message using a Linux thing. Any Googler could do it, but other than that, there was no real way around it fully. So it was kind of fun to play with it.
Yeah, that's interesting you bring that up, because that's actually focusing on sort of the first stage of that whole bootstrap process, which involves DEP. Mm-hmm. And Duo Labs did some really great research a few months ago, I think it was 2 months ago now, on basically they found a weakness in how devices identify themselves to Apple servers. Yep. And it turns out that it's only based on the serial number of the device.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and there was the really big finding, which I think a lot of people miss, the really importance of this. But they found that it's basically only in software, and so there's no hardware-backed device attestation.
Yep.
And so what they suggested as sort of their main most favored mitigation is that Apple should utilize the new incredible T2 chips that are in the new MacBook Pros and the iMac, and now the new MacBook Air that just came out, to basically do hardware-backed device attestation, so that serial numbers associated with devices that have a T2 chip would not be spoofable, because Apple servers would say, hey, you should be sending something that's signed by the T2 chip, and you're not, and so we know this is spoofed, right?
Yep.
But I think, unfortunately, so I actually wrote a blog post about this because I think a lot of people sort of missed the point there and focused too much on what the MDM vendors could do to mitigate in the short term.
Yeah.
But really, the only true mitigation that really solves the problem at the root is if Apple adds this hardware-backed device attestation.
Yeah.
And let me gel this down just a little bit. For some of our viewers may not be 100% on some of the tech piece of this, but the briefing that Jesse gave at Blackhat, I put a link to that in the show notes. So if you want to check out more about that, you can certainly get to that online and check the show notes out for it. But just to gel this down, and Jesse can correct me if I'm wrong, but and it is an oversimplified view of it, but and I'm going to admit to a civil crime that the statute of limitations has run out on, so don't waste time getting your badge out. But way back when I first connected to the internet, the ISP came to me and they basically told me that in order to connect to their system, I had to have this modem, and the modem had to be authenticated to a router, and the router or a computer. They said I couldn't. They never mentioned the word router. They said I had to designate a computer in my house that would be the internet computer. And so, of course, I wanted to connect my entire house and all the computers and servers and everything else I had, including everything I could find, to the internet. And so what they did, of course, was they just took the MAC address from the computer's NIC, and they put that MAC address into their system. And so as soon as I knew that, I took the MAC address from that and I spoofed the MAC address on a Cisco router, and I put the Cisco router connected to their modem, and then I could connect, my entire back office network to it. And I think that kind of gels down the idea that Jesse's talking about with these Apple devices, where someone can go in and they can essentially create a man-in-the-middle attack, which is sort of what I was doing with that. In violating all the service agreements that I had, but that's not who I'm using now. So, and it was a long time ago. So we would never do anything like that today, of course. Do you think that's in at least the ballpark, Jesse, to oversimplify it for people that are not, super sophisticated on doing these kind of attacks?
Yeah, I'd say it's very similar. Just like you can spoof a MAC address, you can spoof the serial number, and the reason you can do those spoofing attacks in either of those examples is because of the fact that there's no, separate, secure enclave, for example, that's sitting off to the side. That's something you can't tamper with. It's kind of like this self-contained black box that's incredibly hardened. And without something like that, then spoofing, a MAC address or a serial number would always be possible, right? Because the other end, the server side, has no way of knowing whether the spoofed request was valid or the real one was valid, because there's no difference in terms of how that data looks, right?
Right.
So without cryptographic signing of that data that can be verified on the other end, you're kind of at a loss in terms of telling the difference between one versus the other.
So if all that takes us back around to your dashboard product, which is Apple focused, but I wanted to maybe spend the remaining time just a little bit with you and Russ talking about the future. And the future, I think, is this sort of post-transhumanistic world of being surrounded by meshes of devices. I mean, already we're seeing that just here in this is not my home, just here in this environment. There are many, many devices that are all talking to each other, that are communicating, whether it's across the internet or just intra-communicating. And I see this, I personally can't wait to get, my bolt-on bore guy and all that kind of fun stuff. But I mean, basically, as the future starts racing towards us, whether we like it or not, we're going to be surrounded with devices that basically tell us to trust them. And as that even, and I'll say the word. I know that we don't like to say the word AI, but and I'm not talking about machine learning here. I'm talking about real AI. That's going. These human pests need to be wiped out. But when the AI starts telling us you need to trust this device, I mean, do you see that a product like this extending on out into that future? Because we're going to have some mechanism to say which of these many thousands of drones floating around do I trust, which ones are threats to me, and how do I figure that out?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this idea of needing to have full visibility of your fleet, and whether that fleet is made up of laptops or phones or tablets or light bulbs and washing machines in the future. To your point, you're only going to have an increased need for that type of visibility because it's going to be just harder and harder to actually keep track of everything that's on your network or could affect your network security or your device security. And it's funny when you were talking about this, I was recalling that I had just read a really fascinating and terrifying blog post that was linked from Hacker News called "I Bought Some Awful Light Bulbs So You Don't Have to." And it's really scary stuff. I mean, you wouldn't believe. Well, I mean, you would believe, but I think it would be shocking to a lot of people. This light bulb actually enabled anyone to actually join his internal home network because of how it was built, and so basically completely bypassing any firewalls he had in place. Just basically created a backdoor on his network just from installing a smart light bulb. So really scary stuff. I think people don't really realize the negative impact that some of these Internet of Things devices can have on their security.
Well, I mean, think about this. I know they're making medical issue, but I was thinking about it. I was walking through a couple of different medical facilities this week, and I noticed the array of devices in these medical facilities that I could actually see on my iPhone just looking at the open stuff that was around. And that ranged from stuff that was issuing pharmaceuticals to, and we're getting to the point where very soon you're going to start seeing people having medical devices embedded in their bodies. I actually was talking to a nurse about it. I was like, "Do you think that's good?" She said, "Oh yeah, that's coming. Where you're going to have an insulin pump or a pacemaker or some other medical devices embedded." And all those things are now Internet of Things enabled. So they're designed to phone home. They're designed to phone other systems. And all those things are going to have to be trusted. And I don't know that the manufacturers and engineers who design it are really thinking down those pipelines yet.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I do know, I didn't get a chance to catch it, but I remember there was a talk at Blackhat about this exact topic called Understanding and Exploiting Implanted Medical Devices. And so, yeah, I think that's going to become a big area of focus for security researchers and for Black Hat hackers probably as well in the future.
And Jesse, do you think that we talk about the future of security and products like Dashboard, do you think that in addition to AI as a potential savior, or maybe not, do you think that blockchain technology offers any kind of help with how we're going to deal with the majority of these devices, which are now ubiquitous, right? They're like refrigerators or washing machines. Do you think that blockchain technology could help us come up with a sort of mesh or grid array type of security authentication?
Yeah, I'm not sure personally about how it will change the story around device authentication and identity. The thing that really comes to mind for me with blockchain and security is, if you imagine that your product has like an audit log or something, you can imagine blockchain is great for an audit trail of actual activity or administrative actions, because that way you can't possibly have an attacker, tamper with your audit log, right? If you actually have it recorded in a blockchain. And so I think that would be a pretty compelling use case for that technology.
All right. Any other comments about this? I'm scared of this technology a lot because I really don't think that we have ever thought this way. So a lot of these designs that are coming into being today, whether it's dishwashers or pacemakers, were designed in sort of the pre-security era, which was not that long ago. And a lot of engineers, no offense engineers, but your job is to make things work and not necessarily to make them safe. I know that role is changing, but it was never the case. And we've talked about this over and over on Security Weekly, and we've talked about it on SDL. Any other comments you want to share, Jesse?
Well, what you just said actually made me think of something, which is one of the things we believe pretty strongly at Fleetsmith is in this concept of building products that are secure by design. And I think historically, a lot of the problems you've seen, around breaches, around insecure configuration, there's so many breaches that have to do just with basically configuration problems, right? And the way we think about that is we should just make the defaults secure and make it, if there's no reason to actually make it configurable, we should just choose the most secure option, just design it in, just bake it in. And that way, the most secure option isn't something you even have to think about. It's just automatic. And I think that's the direction we need to move in as an industry, honestly.
I completely agree. I just think it takes time to get there and to change people that have spent their lives designing chips or whatever to say, okay, what if someone attacked this using this method? And they're going, well, why would someone do that? Because that's always the thing I got from engineers was, why would someone do something they don't need to do? Because that's that very efficient engineering idea. Russ, any other comments?
No, I think the security by design. I think that's we're moving hopefully towards that as a global entity. And I think that's super important, especially with IoT and the pervasiveness of technologies as they begin to weave themselves into other areas of our lives that were previously unthought of.
Yep. All right. So I want to thank Russ and Jesse Endahl of Fleet. Interesting discussion today. If you're in the United States, have a happy Thanksgiving. If you're not in the United States, well, get that. I don't know. But remember, your electronic heart monitor may be out to get you, and it may be being out to get you in conjunction with your iPhone and some other AI that's located somewhere else. Wintermute, you know who you are. Just a little shout out to you out there. But thanks all of you for joining us on Secure Digital Life this week. Very likely next week I shall return from the great beyond and be in that very colorful studio with you once again. Thank you so much.